Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for a special live screening of Jumbo, which was an official selection at the AFI Film Festival and Sundance Film Festival. It's offered courtesy of Dark Star Pictures, and it's going to become available on demand beginning Tuesday, March 16th. I'm going to run the whole film live during the webinar. It runs about 93 minutes, and that will be followed immediately by a live Q&A with the writer-director Zoé Wittock. So I hope that you'll stick around. This is a very unique film, and I hope that you enjoy it. And please join us for the Q&A afterwards. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us for the Q&A. Let's welcome up the writer-director Zoé Wittock. And I have just changed the setting here so that you can rename yourself. Apologies.
Oh. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is really such a beautifully unique story. I have a lot to ask about writing it, but I did want to start with getting a sense of where the story came to you from.
It actually came very randomly. I mean, I was just browsing the internet and I just kind of stumbled upon one of those big flashy articles with a big title asking you to click, and I clicked, and the title was, a woman married the Eiffel Tower. And I was like, okay, what is wrong there? What the hell? I need to get to know more. And that's sort of where it came from. I mean, obviously, I went further and I started researching because I became obsessed with it. And then I called Erika Eiffel, who changed her last name because she married the Eiffel Tower. And it's actually my encounter with her that really pushed me, I guess, to go a little further than just, curiosity on the internet. Because when I talked to her, she was really, she was very endearing and she was very grounded. And I guess I was originally expecting to get someone a lot more weird, and to have someone with a very sane, speech and a very grounded way of talking to you and explaining things and really willing to try and get you to understand whatever she was feeling was really intriguing. And then she kept talking to me about the love story that, she was living. And kept comparing it to other stories that she had before, connections with other human beings, I guess, men and women that always failed and never worked, and how she had tried to be alone and that didn't work as well. And so, I don't know, it was so interesting to get such a different look at a love story. And I guess I started really believing in her story and her love story. And that's when I realized, well, there's probably a movie there, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that's curious to understand, but all we're getting on the internet is either, very grounded documentaries, or more likely, big bad reportage, on objecting sexual, most of the time making fun of it. So I'm really not trying to go anywhere deeper, And I also felt like it spoke to her, to Erika, obviously, but it spoke to me. So I was like, if it speaks to me, it must be a much more universal thing than just, a story about objecting sexuals. And yeah, so it all started from there.
So what was the process of deciding to create a completely brand new story instead of adapting Erika's story?
Well, I thought about adapting her story first, and then I was like, well, adapting someone's story just feels sometimes very, like it has a lot of constraints. And also, you just think about the Eiffel Tower, and it might be a phallic kind of object, but it's a very static object, and it has already so much connotation to it that it just didn't really speak to me. And the story just came together when I thought about placing the story in a theme park ride and making that object a ride, because suddenly I was feeling attracted, I guess, in a way to that object, because it's a moving object. It's an object that we all have a memory with, whether from childhood or even as an adult. But we've all felt things on a ride, you know, being afraid or scared or joyful, excited. And so I just felt like it was a much easier way in. And obviously an object like that allows for more, I feel, more dreams, more escape, more of an escape than a static one. So yeah, so I decided to switch the point of view on that. But if you look at other objective sexuals, you know, I started writing the story, and then I realized that a year later that there is actually someone who did marry a theme park bride. So in a way, I wasn't that far.
Wow.
Yeah.
What I find is really compelling about the film is the compassion and earnestness that you give to her story. And it's funny that you mentioned that you were expecting someone weirder, because it does feel like the tone of this film could have been different and it probably wouldn't have worked. But
Right.
it's the fact that you care about her story that you're willing to sort of go with the extremes of the premise. And so did you struggle much with how you wanted to tell the story in terms of I guess the amount of compassion you would give towards trying to understand what she's going through?
Yeah, because it's, you know, whenever I mentioned the subject matter to friends at the time when I was just starting to write the story, it would spark so many different reactions, and it would definitely create heated debates, you know, amongst people. And I found that very interesting. And at the same time, it makes it a big responsibility when you're taking on a subject like that. You know, how seriously do you take it? How much compassion? Is it the right thing to do to be so earnest and so open about it and so okay with it? You know, and I guess my answer to that was, you know, I'm not making a film to tell you how to feel or how to think. I'm just making a film to tell you a story and then create questions and curiosity on the subject matter. And I think the whatever answer it is that you leave the film with is the one that you're capable of hearing and understanding. You know, it's not the one that I'm sort of feeding you in your mouth, you know. And I feel like, you know, whenever people ask me, what do you want people to sort of come out of the film with, I just say, I just want them to have gone all the way to the end and want to ask a question to their friends about how they feel about it. Because I think it's just the conversation. If you're emotionally involved within the film, and that was my biggest challenge, then the conversation can happen after in a very open-minded way. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But I mean, that is a credit, I think, to having written a script that, you know, where that comes through. And I'm curious about the initial conversation with the producers, the financiers. Like, how much did they understand of I guess, of your vision here? And what was it particularly challenging to get people to believe in it, or did it just sort of leap off the page?
Well, strangely enough, you know, a lot of people were very, you know, they were intrigued by the idea and very afraid by the idea at the same time. Then they would read the script and they were like, yeah, this is actually pretty convincing. And then the financiers and them sort of started kicking back in and were like, but I don't know how to sell this. So it was oftentimes a no, you know. And I think specifically, you know, being a first-time director, and I was associated with a first-time producer as well on this project. So I think there was nobody to really back the vision with experience. You know, I had a bunch of short films, same with my producer, but like we didn't have one sort of either a star director or a star producer, so that financier would kind of overcome that fear. So it did take a long time to get it off the ground. And then, you know, then you start going into the process of the harsh process of rewrites with financiers' notes, supposedly to please them, but at the same time, you want to try and keep your story intact and your characters intact and your vision intact. So that's, to me, was, I guess, one of the most painful process of the whole making of the film. And it takes years. And I guess, you know, in France, we're lucky, you know, France and Belgium, we're lucky enough to have sort of government support and funding for films. But all those committees, they're like financiers in a way. Sure, they're looking for more artsy film and open-minded films, but they're really looking for very specific films. And usually in France, it's more grounded films, more like, you know, realistic films. So when you come in with a fantastical film, even convincing those committees becomes a little hard, you know. So sometimes you'd be like, yes, like the biggest French committee gave us a hard yes right away, and then all the other smaller ones were like, nah, I don't, you know, they were hesitant all the time. So I think it took a long time, but we ended up making the film with people that were like giving us a yes with like 200% behind us, you know. It was like either people were afraid and were never going, but when they jumped on board, they were full on, you know, and they weren't like halfway there.
It's hard to watch this film and imagine that anyone had like, I guess, like a say in your vision, because it does feel such a complete and personal work of art. Can you tell us a bit about some of those notes in terms of what they wanted, maybe something that you didn't do that was kind of over the top in terms of a note, and then one that actually you do think was constructive?
Well, I think a note that I would often get was like, you know, how much are you going to show and what are you going to show, and maybe you shouldn't show anything, and so that was one note that really annoyed me all the time. And the other one that really annoyed me and that I never put in was, why don't we see them going to see a doctor or more people from the outside trying to fix it? Or why are they not, like, why is it not so much about fixing her, you know? And I was like, well, that's obviously not the story. The story is not about fixing her. The story is about how does she integrate, you know, the community that she's in when she's completely out with who she is. So those were notes that I was never taking and really kind of putting aside. I remember one note that I, you know, quite early on that was useful. It's like, because so this character sort of starts as, you know, a little fragile and reveals herself as a very strong character because she's completely in line with the fantasy that she's living, and she's kind of openly, you know, sharing it with her mother, you know, very naively, you know. Mm-hmm. And there was at some point in an earlier draft, she was kind of never questioning that. And someone mentioned, well, don't you think it's such a thing that she might question it at some point? So there was a little bit of questioning, but I think I insisted a little bit I added one or two more moments of doubting or searching, which weren't in the original version. That was a little bit more frontal and a little bit more about, you know, fighting her way through. So I think over the course of time and notes like this, like it did bring a little bit more subtlety to some feelings of the script, you know.
Noémie Merlan really commits to this role. I mean, it's very impressive. Can you talk about choosing her for the role and some of the things that you discussed in advance about how you wanted this character to be played?
Yeah, so the casting process for Noémie was not like, now she's very much a bit of a sensation because of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. But when I first casted her, it was because we shot the film late 2018. So I casted her actually in 2016 when we got the first financing, and then it took 2 years to get the rest of the financing. But when I casted her in 2016, she wasn't really known and I hadn't seen her in anything. It was just a friend of mine who was like, oh, you know, I met this girl, this young actress, you should check her out if you're casting. So I was like, okay, sure, let's bring her into the casting call. And she was one of the first girls to come by. And, you know, she gave an amazing performance, very earnest and very special, but she was so strong that I felt she wasn't the character. And she was also very pretty. And, you know, she'd come in with, I don't know, like a tank top, and she was dressed completely wrongly, which I was like, it's okay, just look over it and look past it. But I just felt her performance was so strong and so confident that I wouldn't find a way to sort of bring the nuances to the character. So I did not call her back at first, you know, and then I ended up going to like seeing probably 120, 30 more girls and then calling back those girls. and a second time, a third time, and I think I called back even 4 times. And then I was like, I don't know why I can't seem to say yes to any of those girls, even though they were great, you know. And I was like, I must have seen her already. It's impossible that I missed her. So I just started thinking about these girls that I had seen and not called back, and immediately knowing his name came back. And I was like, why didn't I call her back? You know, because I did have an instinct that she was interesting, but my producer was like, as well, she's not right. So I think I let myself be influenced at first. And I was like, I need to call her back. And then again, my casting director is like, no, she's not the role. That's not her. And I was like, I don't care. I just need to see her back. So I called her personally and I was like, I apologize. Will you please come back? So she came back. And then with a few notes, she just blew my mind and she got me crying after having seen so many times the same scene over and over again. And she surprised me. And I was like, wow, how can you still surprise me? Like after having seen so many casting sessions. And so that's when I knew it was her, you know. So that's the casting process, which is quite funny. And then I guess the preparation for the role, because for me, Jeanne is such an instinctive character and not a very intellectual one, I really wanted to stay away from rehearsing too much the scenes. I wanted to leave that for the set. So we did a lot of the prep work was more on physicality and characterization than any scene work. So we worked first on body language and the way she walked and the way she moved her arms, you know, the way she talked to people on language. And then once we started getting that down, I kind of, you know, went from having her walking around the place all the time to reenacting it in improvisation scene, you know, improv scenes. And so we worked a lot on that. And then aside from maybe 2 or 3 readings of the script with the other actors, we just went on set without really rehearsing any of the scenes, you know?
I'm curious to know which scenes you had the actors auditioning read. Because
yeah. So one of the scenes was Jeanne introducing Jumbo to her mother. Which was a difficult one because obviously we didn't have a Jumbo, but it just showed me that kid in Jeanne. It's that moment where she gets so excited about showing Jumbo, and I was really curious to see what was happening in the actress's eyes at that moment. And then the other scene was the big fight with the mom, where she throws her out. So we didn't do the whole scene, we did parts of it, but we sort of started with that, and sometimes we would go off into improv as well for the casting.
Yeah, because I mean, it's 2 very different kinds of scenes. The scene that really was just so striking visually is, of course, when you sort of manifest the erotic desire through the oil from the machine, and it's such a beautiful image. I'm curious to know, like the evolution of how that was going to get expressed, and then how you actually pulled it off.
Yeah, so you know that scene. So that scene was in the script from the first draft. It wasn't exactly like that, but it was quite similar. I knew I wanted an orgasmic scene, and because I knew quite early in the script the sort of tone that I wanted for the film and that balance between realism and fantastical moments, for me that had to be a more surrealist moment. And then it comes to, okay, how do I express that? And I was like, what does a machine have, you know, that I can play with to make it aside, you know, that doesn't turn into her rubbing herself on the machine, you know, that I was going to have a little later in the story to juxtapose it, but like, how do I make it, you know, completely surreal? And I was like, okay, well, where can she go on a machine? On top, at the bottom? And I didn't know, and that didn't quite come early, but I knew that Jumbo was playing with lights. And so I had this idea that he was going to call her into sex with lights. And because the language of red, green, and blue was already used, I needed a new color. So I went to white, And I think that's when it started making sense. It's like, okay, white, you know, if I think about an orgasm, how do I visually express it? I'm like, I don't know, this rush, this white light rush of, you know, sensation. And it's like, okay, well, there's something there. And I think the, you know, so then the idea of this infinite white room came, and the oil, which was already an element that I had in the script at other time, in other scenes, it was like, okay, well, that, you know, because it's a mechanical machine and I can't bend a mechanical arm or anything, the most moving thing that I have as a tool is the oil. So let me use that as, you know, a way also to lure her into that light. So it was a mix of lighting and oil. And so it slowly just kind of turned into this white room with this black oil, and obviously it contrasted really well. And yeah, so that's how it was written in the script. And then when we made it, the idea of her walking down into Jumbo came from exploring the machine. You know, once we found it, because it was moving in so many directions and it had so many possibilities, you know, I went and explored the machine and I was like, okay, you know, walked on it, climbed on it, went down, and I was like, well, there's a whole thing beneath that we're not using. So how about we do something with that, you know? And so there was already some kind of opening, and we enhanced it with production design. So that she could literally walk down into Jumbo and suddenly, you know, the straight cut to the white was happening. And then the whole white scene is obviously in a studio. A lot of the VFX is special effects, so live. And you at the end of the scene, you obviously have a few VFX shots to enhance the sort of going against gravity movement.
Mm. I'm curious how you found the machine itself, and you know, what was the like, how closely is Jumbo in the film to what you had originally thought of?
Well, that's funny. It's so interesting because in the script everything was written: the reaction, the lighting scheme, the oil, the smoke, the way it moved. But for some reason, and I had this wheel and this big machine, and it seemed clear on the page, but it really was never clear in my mind because I didn't have the picture of what was the right, you know, ride. So I was just like kind of praying to God that the right machine would come along and that it would all come together. But I knew that I needed movement to bring that ride to life. So I was like, that's the one most important thing that I need, and that's the biggest thing that I can't change with production design or engineering, etc., which is the mechanics of the machine. So what we did, we looked all over the place, and we really got to know the community of ride owners. And I had seen, after advice and talking to people, I'd seen, you know, a Move It 24 online. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but they didn't have any in France. So I had to look for another ride. I couldn't really find the right one. I was about to settle on one that I wasn't really sure about. And then a few weeks before the shoot, someone calls us and they're like, oh, we heard you're looking for a Move It 24. There's one passing by France right now. You should go check it out. So we did. It was perfect. And we brought it over to the theme park ride in Belgium, and, you know, changed it, made it manual because it's an automatic machine. So turned it manual, changed the electrical system of it, and then, you know, changed the 4,000 light bulbs. So we had the control over the lighting, and, you know, installed a panel light on the side. And we were pretty much like 4 or 5 people puppeteering the machine at the same time while knowing the exact thing.
Mm. Have you shown the film to the woman who married the Eiffel Tower? And if so, did she feel like there was an emotional resonance with her own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. We were lucky because she now lives in Berlin, and the film played at the Berlin Film Festival as well as Sundance. And that was right before COVID, probably the last times we were in a theater all together. And it was a big screening room, like 1,000 people. So it was just amazing. And we asked her to come by, watch the film, and she was very happy to see the film. And I was actually just sitting a few feet away from her, and I was terrified that she would just, you know, walk up and walk out in the middle of the screening. But she was surprisingly, she was so open to the film. And, there are comedic moments in the film where you laugh at the character, with the film, at the absurdity of the situation. There were some moments like that. And so there was some laughter in the theater, and I was afraid she'd take it personally, but she was laughing along with people, And so that's how grounded and how smart she is. She's like, I know this is weird, but I'm okay with the fact that it's weird. And, I'm at peace with the fact that people don't understand or think it's weird. And then she was crying at the end as well. She was just tearing up. And then she came up to me and was like, I don't know how you got that line of dialogue, because I know I never told you I said that to my mom, and so that to me was, I guess, the biggest reward, is that, we communicated, and I'd spent so much time trying to understand her that, some of it just came naturally from the situation. And I think that's where you get a universal film, it's because it's not just about her, it's not just inspired by her, it's anybody that might have had a huge disagreement in terms of lifestyle and life choices with their parents, and coming to terms with themselves, and having people around them coming to terms with them, So I think that is something that's very universal, and that's why, those lines could come from my mouth or her or anybody else's.
I was really pleasantly surprised with the way that you wrote Jeanne's mother's boyfriend. Can you talk a little bit about writing that character and where you wanted to go with him?
Jeanne's mother's boyfriend, right?
Yes.
Yes. It's interesting because he was always there from the first draft, but he wasn't as emotionally impactful as he is in the last draft, in the last version of the film. And I think it's the more I spend time with these characters, with Jeanne and her mother, originally it was more the mother that was kind of figuring things out on her own, but I just loved so much that, this character that originally was just there to sort of have a male counterpart to the mother and to express her sexuality with, suddenly had more to say. And I love the fact that it was a stranger and a man that was the most sensitive person of the story, rather than a woman. I just felt that it was so much more interesting, and it spoke to many of the men that I know around me. And so the more I got into it, the more I grew attached to that character, and I wanted to give him more. And then I was like, that's it. When it came together at the end that he was going to be the one to sort of give that extra push to the mother, I was like, that's perfect. He fits in the story now. He's there, and he's not just, a sidekick character that's there to either make you laugh, make you uncomfortable, and express some sexuality. He really has a purpose. And I just thought that it was so beautiful that it was a man. Yeah.
I'm seeing some questions that I will read out loud, but if anyone else in the audience wants to send in a question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, so this first question is, how did you incorporate the music, color, and imagery into your film? It has so much artistic flavor in it. Any influences from music, film, or visual media?
So how did well, strangely enough, a lot of it, I guess maybe it's because I spent so much time on the script, having to do rewrites with financiers, but a lot of it was, really incorporated within the script, just because it was so important to the storytelling, more important than it had ever been in any of the short films that I had done before. So a lot of it was in the script. And then, when it came to directing, to prepping, to direct a movie, we started obviously narrowing down the color palette. And for me, the biggest note that we had with my DP was, how do we bring some realism to the fantastical and some fantastical to the realism? So we sort of got a balance, could go from one context, which is the house, back to the theme park ride, and back and forth, and sort of easily jump from one to the next. So if you look at it, the house has a lot of colors, even though they're tame colors. It has a lot of colors that you can find in a theme park ride as well. And in the theme park ride, we always measured our, fantastical fantasies, I guess. Sometimes wanted to go really much further, but it was going into a world where Jumbo was moving and acting in a way that he couldn't in reality. So we always kind of kept it grounded. And so I think the mix of colors is really what helped us make those two worlds work. And in terms of music and influences, I mean, I knew I wanted something quite simple and classical in a way that had classical influences, because I was really going for those emotional, authentic feelings. And so I really wanted something that could get to your core. And I had worked with this composer before. And what I loved about his work is that he has that, and he's got a little bit more of a modern take to it with some electronic beats at times. And, so it was, again, a very interesting mix. And as far as the influences go, I'm terrible with references, and I feel we're all so influenced. But in terms of specific references, I remember the colors. In terms of the colors, I really remember from Kieslowski, red and blue, that was so striking in terms of color. And so to me, the juxtaposition of red and blue, which you see a lot in the film with the green, kind of, I just kept seeing images from that film whenever I was thinking about it. So I think that's one thing. And then, a lot of people have seen some Spielberg in the film. And it's interesting because I didn't really share with my team any of the references from Spielberg. So that's not what first came to my mind. But I think, being a kid that grew up in the 90s, I'm obviously very influenced by him. So that's probably one of them. And, I would sometimes think about Twilight Zone as well, and really try and pick and choose from different films, which ones, I mean, yeah, I don't know now. Yeah, I mean, these were probably the main ones, but I often go to pictures and paintings more than I go to films when I try and share ideas with people, So in terms of, I'm very influenced by the Belgian surrealist movement that are Magritte and Paul Mouget, Marcel Franck, French as well. So these are always on my mind in terms of composition of shots and framing and an overall feeling, how an idea can express a feeling and vice versa, not just, it's like trying to find that extra coding, which I think they're always great. It's like you just put two objects together, don't have to say anything, and suddenly it has a whole new meaning. I think they're so great at it. So I'm just fascinated by that.
Okay, the next question is the sci-fi fantasy genre your focus in filmmaking, and do you plan on doing working in this genre again?
It's not my focus. I think I usually get to a story more thematically and character-wise. It's just that this story really felt like it needed that genre to really come to life. It couldn't just be a drama. It really needed that genre. So I usually just go from an instinct, an idea, a story, part of a story or something. And if I think the theme is really interesting, I try to turn it into a script. And it's during that process that I always think about genre. And I'm like, how can I use genre to sort of push it to the next level and push the emotional scope? Because I do feel whenever you hint at a genre, you're suddenly a little bit more free. You don't have the responsibility of being so true and authentic in terms of everything that happens. You can allow yourself to be a little crazier and push the buttons up. I don't know if you say that. I'm sorry, I have weird expressions translating from the French. But yeah, so I think allowing yourself to go, take from certain genres and use such an element of genres is really freeing. It's very freeing. And I think being a Belgian filmmaker and not French, which is very close, but at the same time, very different, is that the French filmmakers, you know, they have such a history and such a background in film and in very realistic films that oftentimes, you know, it's really hard to sort of veer away from that very dramatic auteur realistic films. Whereas, you know, coming from Belgium, there's a lot less pressure because we're a newer country, you know, we're younger in cinema. We did not invent cinema. So it's like we've always been able to play with genres much more easily because we don't have that history that is, oh, Belgian cinema is like this, you know. We do have the realistic films, we have the crazy comedies, we have like, you know, it's more of an explosion of tone in Belgium than I find in overall French filmmaking. Even though there is a French new wave, I feel at the moment, of all these young filmmakers that I'm seeing arrive with their first film that play a lot with genre. And that will tell you that they're this generation that grew up with American films, you know, from the 90s or 80s, you know, late 80s, 90s, you know, very, you know, those films that were way too much at the time, you know, very genre, way too, like, not very subtle, but like so like candy, you know. And so I think they're trying to mix the candy from their childhood of all these American films that they got coming here with this French realism that is more of their heritage. So it is creating a new interesting mix.
A question from Drew: what was the hardest scene to write and what was the hardest scene to shoot?
Very interesting question. What was the hardest scene to write? I think the hardest scene to write was the fight with the mother, just because I really wanted to hit so many beats. Like I wanted to get, obviously, the harshness of the mother. I wanted you to feel for Jeanne. At the same time, I was talking about a subject matter that was really tricky, and I could almost understand that the mother was so extreme because it's so hard to sort of, you know, hear when you first hear it. And so that subtle, you know, rhythm of that scene was really hard to get. Like, when do you laugh? When do you cry? When do you get uncomfortable? And just, you know, going from one tone to the next was probably the most subtle, difficult thing to write. And then in terms of shooting, which one was the hardest? I feel like they were all hard. I mean, obviously the sex scene in the middle of the white scene was quite tough because we didn't have the money to shoot a scene like that. I mean, we knew how it should be shot, which was, you know, in a very specific studios with round edges and, you know, and a whole thing installed for lights and, you know, all the equipment you needed to make a scene like that work, but we didn't have the money and we had to shoot in Luxembourg for point reasons, you know, in terms of tax breaks, etc. So we had to shoot in that country, but we didn't have the studio or the equipment to shoot it. So it took us a lot of nights of brainstorming on how to recreate a studio that we didn't have and how to attach those lights, you know, on the roof when we didn't have a roof to attach it to. So it was a whole huge rigging to sort of be smart with. But then again, all the scenes with Jumbo that were so intricate in terms of timing were hard because we had to get the lighting right at the same time, the smoke at the same time, the speed at the same time, the movement, the camera, the focus, the actress, you know, and it was all so much coordination to get that one shot right and everything right together. And we really didn't have any time to shoot this. So that, I think, was also a very big challenge.
Ronald is asking you to speak about the final scene when the mother and daughter run away.
Interesting. Well, that scene originally was not the end of the film. So we have another ending that we shot, which was, I think, which didn't leave the audience with the same feeling. It did have that high on the bridge and then the the mother and daughter were like, they were all getting into the car as a family and driving off, and they were laughing and so happy. And then, you know, I guess 30 seconds later, you know, just that one shot, you know, after laughing, they were starting to realize what they had done, and they were both happy, but at the same time a little uncomfortable and not really knowing. They were a little confused. You know, Jeanne was happy, but they were all a little confused. And then she became a bit confused. So that was the original ending, because I was really happy with the idea of like that rush of ownership at the end. And I kind of just wanted to leave you with that slight hint of, oh, are they confused or not? You know, how are they going to feel next? But it just didn't feel, it just didn't work in terms of the rhythm of the overall film. And it ended up being, instead of being a smart ending, it just became a disappointing ending. So I decided to cut it earlier and end it on that bridge scene. And anyway, for me, that moment on the bridge was already so cathartic and so important. And I really wanted them to walk over that bridge. You know, the idea of like going from one end of the bridge to the other, you know, crossing a path was really important to me. And so, you know, it just ended up the best place to sort of start the film. And I just really loved the idea that you sort of saw that family united at the end. You know, and, you know, you have the boyfriend in the back, and then you sort of slowly focus on the mother and the daughter, and then you focus on her, you know, because it's her story. And I loved how it very subtly sort of went from a family to her, but ultimately they're one. Yeah.
This is from Dave. At first I was getting a similar vibe to Her, the movie, but like the way you diverged from it. Was that film an influence?
Interesting. Yeah. So it was not an influence, because I had already written the script of the film when Her came out. And when I saw Her, I obviously saw the similarities in terms of theme. And there were interesting moments of, I think, in Joaquin Phoenix's performance that I do think stuck with me, in terms of one facial expression of this kind of sweet, naive happiness when he's talking to Scarlett Johansson. So little moments like that kind of stuck with me and did, I think, influence me in some way for Jumbo. But it was not a direct influence. No, I remember also seeing, you know, earlier on, like Lars and the Real Girl, for example, which has a similar theme, but is much more comedic. And again, it was an interesting watch, because it's talking about a similar problematic, and the sense of, you know, craziness, who's crazy, who's not, what's the norm, is he crazy or not, and that question of, you know, should we judge him or go along with it, or so that was really interesting in that film. But again, it was not a direct influence. I felt like my film was so different. So, which in a way is good. You don't want to feel like your film is, oh, it's that film. Great, I'm remaking that, but better. You're never making it better. Just how do you make it your own? But
Okay, so just a last one from Reza. Any plans to work with Noémie again? And is there any possibility of coming to Hollywood to work here?
So as far as working with Noémie again, we've said how much we love each other and would love to work together again. I might have a project with her, but I'm not sure she's the right person for it yet, in terms of age. In terms of acting, I know she is, but in terms of age range, and she might be too young for the role. So it's the kind of question where you're like, where do I just change the character a little bit to fit the actress, or the other way around? But we both definitely want to work together again. So we'll see. And as far as working in Hollywood, yeah, I am developing a project right now with an American company, which was a project that I had written in French, but I always kind of thought was best for the US, but didn't really, you know, working in France, you don't want to start, you know, trying things out in the US. But after Sundance, because Sundance is such a great festival for the US market to get to know young talents, that, you know, a lot of the American, you know, agents or producers just kind of came and called. And so I had this project and I quickly adapted it into English and started, pitching it. And I guess at some point it just worked. So yeah, I'm working on one project in the US.
So just to remind everyone, this film is going to come out available on video on demand starting Tuesday, March 16th. Is there also, now that, I know this is very last minute, now that theaters are finally reopening in Los Angeles, are you planning theatrical exhibition at all?
I don't know. We don't know yet because, we were supposed to get a limited theatrical and we sort of waited for the theaters to reopen to release the film. And then when I guess we released the film, they were not open. So yeah, it's still a bit of a blur, but hopefully we get a few screenings on a big screen. We'll let you know if we do.
I certainly hope so. Yeah, it would be wonderful to have this film up on a big screen.
Yeah. So much better.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this film with us. It was really like one of the most original films I've seen in a very long time, and it was really wonderful to share it with everyone out there.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for being here, for watching the film, staying till the end. I'm really excited that it's coming out.
Congratulations and have a great night.
Yes, you too. Bye. Bye.